بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Today's talk will be about something that is very serious and I think has been overlooked for a very long time. The issue of the Muslims themselves not being effective in social change or spiritual change in their communities for a very long time. And we have to understand what is the reasons behind why the Muslims are not being effective, whether it's in the inner city, whether it's in the suburbs, obviously for different reasons. And I will have my brother Yusuf Rios today come on, and I will ask my brother questions, and he will be responding to these questions so we can get to the bottom of this, what we think is a mystery, but it's really not a mystery. Other than the fact that from sins and from total disarray, disunity, and other things like that has caused the Muslims to be in total chaotic behavior. And this chaotic behavior just takes on the everyday norm of the American society. How can you make change in a society when you act just like them? So this is what's happening. And so we find that whether it's in the suburbs, whether it's in the inner city, if, like, for example, we can clearly see that cultish behavior and this cult that calls itself Salafi, we find clearly that this mode of dawah that we've been doing for all of these years has not made any significant change. I know in Philadelphia that the social reality, where you can sit down and talk about the county, in the Philadelphia is really cosmetic for the Muslims. Thobes, short pants, beards, niqabs, all black. It's really just cosmetic. But if you go deeper into it, you'll clearly see that it's only cosmetic. There has been no spiritual uplifting. There has been no economic uplifting. Nothing. We're not the leaders in school. We're not the leaders in education. We're not the leaders in social change. It's a problem. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلُ صَالِحًا. It's not just being Muslim and saying I'm Muslim. He said, وَعَمِلُ صَالِحًا. Actions go along with saying you're Muslim. And from those actions is that a Muslim should care and be concerned about the people around him, whether they're Muslim or not. وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And Allah Azza wa Jal, he says in this ayat. So there's many ayats in the Quran, and I'll read at least one or two more so we can get the point, what I'm trying to say. Allah says in Surah Al-An'am, and then we'll get to the brother-sister introduction. Allah makes it clear in Surah Al-An'am. Surah Al-Nahl, sorry. I think it's the 25th ayat, where Allah Azza wa Jal he mentions that the one who gives dawah and who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah. And many ayat like that in the Quran, throughout the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, give dawah maw'idah hasana, on and on and on and on and on and on. If we were following these guidelines, would our dawah be successful? And why isn't it being successful? Why is it that we're in the ghettos and that spirit and that energy from the masjid is not projecting itself outside of it? So I'm not going to read too many of the ayats. Really, I just want to get to the brother. I want to invite the brother on because I have many questions for him. There's a lot of ayats that I wanted to read, but that one ayat in the hadith of the Prophet, said, whoever guides to a good deed will get a reward similar to the one who performs it. So there's many ayats. Like I said, I don't want to go too many ayats, but that one ayat in Surah Al-Fussilat, I think suffices. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let me get to bring the brother on now. Bring that brother Yusuf Rios on now. Inshallah ta'ala, the brother be coming on now. Naam, assalamu alaikum. Yusuf, are you there? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shaykh Yusuf. I'm trying to wait for the brother to come up here on camera. I'm adding him. I think he's coming at being added now. He's being added now. So inshallah the brother be coming up.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Well, you sit down, tell me the guy what's going on, Shaykh.
Alhamdulillah, what's going on?
Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Inshallah, this is our brother Yusuf Rios. I would like for you to, inshallah, to introduce yourself to the guest here. Inshallah, then we can get started with the questions I would like to ask you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Yusuf Rios. I don't want to go into too many details. Originally from North Philadelphia in the Hunting Park region, and now I'm residing in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been overseas for a few years, and I studied here also in the U.S. and also have been teaching Islamic studies for a bit, and I continue in that path.
Now, everybody knows this class is about. I was letting them know that obviously we see some of the problems, like for example, Philadelphia, for example, we see the clear ineffectiveness of the dawah there, even though a lot of it is cosmetic. I believe a lot of it, we dress the part, we have beards, we have short pants, we have the niqabs on, we have hijab on. And Philadelphia, we have Muslim names, we have the kuffar wear they short pants, they grow beards, and even in the slang, you hear Arabic in the slang amongst the people of Philadelphia. But the actual social and spiritual revolution that's supposed to come with Islam, for some reason, it's the energy of that is not being seen. So the question I like to ask you, do you think that's the case? That's the first question. Do you think that like place like Philadelphia with all those Muslims there, is it a failure in being effective in changing that environment?
I think from what Islam accomplishes, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, what Islam accomplishes, or what is the mandate of Islam, immediately we can say at one level that it's a failure. But if we look at the reality of how things progress over time, I don't want to be too negative. A lot of people like to beat down Philly, which I think is extremely problematic, especially since you have, a heavy population of indigenous Muslims there, and it becomes an indirect attack on the indigenous population. But I think in-house, we can say that we're failing in where we should be going. But in the big picture, I think that, the success is that we have been able to influence the culture, but we haven't understood the levels, of the qualitative levels which are necessary for us to examine. I want to put it this way: there's certain things which should be achieved in the Dawah, and those things which should be achieved, there's qualitative levels to those realities. The transformation of the individual, the family, the community, the environment, our relationship with those who are not Muslims. The situation in Philadelphia is that Islam reached the general culture. And so a lot of people that come in, they come into the general culture. They come into the Philly culture. They're not necessarily coming in because they have a commitment to Islam on a personal level, or their families were born Muslim. And I think we should separate between those realities, that there's people coming to Islam because they're influenced, but they're not coming into Islam because they have a personal commitment. And even if they take Shahada, and even if they're sinning or doing the Kaba'ir, they're still within the fold of Islam. It doesn't take them out. That just shows the level of the Islam. Now we're at a point where alhamdulillah, we're conscious of we have to change that condition. That we have to change our condition, and we have to impact the environment in a different way. I think it took a long time for us to try to figure out what Islam is. You know, we went through different phases of trying to figure out what Islam is. Some things were correct institutionally, like what the Nation of Islam was doing with building economics and building institutions. But in terms of Aqidah, it was off. You know, and there were other people that focused on Tazkiyat al-Nafs, but maybe the programs that they engaged in were problematic. You know, maybe there was some bid'ah to it. Maybe there was some incorrect and misunderstandings. You know, there was the Dr. York movement. There was a lot of movements. We got hit with a lot of movements. So now, alhamdulillah, we
Yeah.
have a lot of people that are on an educational level where they can kind of understand what Islam is, but what we're failing is social effectiveness. We're failing to address the condition of our people in terms of what they need. And so we're almost like now having to look at history and see that people that had less knowledge than we have, they were more effective in addressing those issues. They were more
Mm.
effective in addressing the condition of the people. And
Nah.
one thing that we can't never, in my opinion, from a sociological level, we can never put to the side is that one of the reasons why Islam arose, and I don't want to be too long-winded, is because there was a Black Power movement. There was a movement which was empowering people of color, and that gave people of color a platform to be able to express themselves and dignity. And that's what's missing in today's time. You know, the depression that's in our community is not by accident. You know, people self-medicating is not by accident. We have so high rates of
Mm.
unemployment. We have educational systems which are failing. You
Mhm.
know, I don't want to get too much into that realm, but saying that, you know, we have to now look at the social environment, look at history, see what the Deen is saying to us, and see how we can apply it. I don't know if I
Nah.
answered the question as you wanted, but that's
Yeah, that's it. Nah. Well, this is my next question, and you might have already answered it, but maybe not. Um, what is what when we say ineffective? What does that really mean? And what are some real life examples of that in our community?
well, the fact, like for instance, ineffective, it means that we're not, the Deen is not really meeting our life needs in terms of stabilizing us socially, mentally, in our families, in our communities. At a certain point in time, the Deen has to give us a sense of direction, you know, in which we can be effective in our own lives. Meaning we're not breaking down, meaning we're not turning to drugs, meaning we're, you know, every time that we meet a challenge in our marriages, you know, we're opting for a divorce, meaning that, you know, we're not there for our children. There's a lot of qualities that we have to uproot from ourselves. And I honestly, I think that we're not addressing the issue of oppression in our community, social systemic racism and the consequences of that. And a lot of times what has happened in recent history is that we have to be honest. There was Islam in the United States, especially in the indigenous community, was heavily tied into black identity. With the rise of the Salafi Dawah, which gave the uh, the people the push to learn Quran and Sunnah, which that's awesome, to go to authentic sources, to be people that are grounded in understanding that there came another movement which was dismissing the whole issue of identity, dismissing that you live in a society that has a history. So people try to hide in the identity that now I'm gonna throw on a thobe and I'm gonna change my name. You know what I'm saying? And I don't have to be involved in society. I don't have to be involved in my community's issues. Whereas before,
Mm.
Muhammad Ali changed his name, but he was primarily involved in his community's issues, or El Hajj Malika Shabazz. They were heavily involved in their community issues, but you didn't see so much that they were saying that Qala Allah wa Qala Rasul. You know, you didn't see so much that there was a heavy focus on learning the book and the Sunnah, because that was something that was they were moving into that phase. We moved into the phase of learning the book and the Sunnah, but we forgot the the community side. You know, we forgot the
Not.
community side,
Mm.
and I say we because
Mhm.
in specific, the Latinos and the blacks, especially on the East Coast, our history is too intertwined. Maybe in other parts of the
Yeah.
country you can say something else, but on the East Coast our history is too intertwined together. You know, and that's just a reality. So
Yeah, it
the
is.
ineffectiveness is dealing with our people's situation. That's why people can dismiss religion, because they can say, well, you're not being effective. Religion is not empowering you. Religion is not changing your condition. So, we're getting beat up from both angles. We're trying to understand what the deen is saying and getting beat up from within the Muslim community. And then from the other side, socially, we're trying to figure out how to practice the deen in a society which already there's inequality, right? And that's what's making us in part ineffective. That we haven't figured out how to deal with the social piece. And Philadelphia has a good example of effectiveness, although some people may not like the whole history. But you have Imam Luqman Abdul Haq, Kenny Gamble. You know, some people may not agree with 100% of that background history, but look at what he did for Philadelphia. He created like over 500 jobs. This is an African American imam who moved towards nation building. And so our piece is to assist in that process, not to knock down what those people have done. There's a lot of elders that have gained territory or have gained ground in certain communities. Our community has become ineffective in that we haven't learned how to deal with what our elders have done and how to bridge it. We went into a battle with them over what's sound and what's not sound, rather than learning how to have patience and kind of working through that. And it's normal because there was some resistance. But now is a time where we have to like reconcile with the achievements of our elders. They had their own masajid. They were moving to having their own schools. They were moving towards collective economics, and they were 100% correct on that. But maybe, they were influenced by this group or that group or this angle or that angle. We may not have agreed with that, or maybe have been wrong. Like people were influenced by the Ahmadiyya movement or some aspects of the Nation of Islam or the Moor Science Temple, so on and so forth. So that in the process of cleaning Aqidah or cleaning house in terms of belief, we also threw out what was good, from the community, which the community already had a sense of building. The community already had a sense of social justice. Community had a sense already that, we're plagued with certain social problems which are undermining our growth. You can't have a Salafi da'wah now because there's a majority population in Philadelphia that's Salafi. You can't have a majority Salafi da'wah that is going to continue to ignore that and say that we're following the Sunnah. Then we're going to continue to be ineffective. We're going to have people attempting to follow the Sunnah, but the Sunnah is not grounded in us enough for us to have a transformation. And that's extremely problematic. Because if you can have a person from the Nation of Islam go into a project, take someone that's strung out on crack, clean them up, transform them, they come back and they become an asset to the community. And we can have the book and the Sunnah, and we can't, we have a brother that's continuously strung out on drugs, and we're not offering anything in that regard. What we're doing is undermining the foundation of the Sunnah in our community itself. And that's what's happening when we look at what has happened with the immigrant community coming into the inner cities and being the middlemen minorities and being the people that are the distributors of tobacco and alcohol and pornography and a lot of different things. They have undermined the respect that Islam had in the inner city. So Islam had a certain respect where people saw a Muslim, oh, that's a righteous brother. All they had to see was someone that looked like a Muslim or heard Assalamu alaikum, and their confidence just went up. And they associated that with black dignity, black liberation, and just like someone in the community that's a leader. That example goes from that to this guy's playing Quran, this guy, is selling alcohol, this guy is doing this, and this guy is calling me. It changed the platform for Islam in the inner city. And so that's where both we and the immigrant community are now ineffective in the da'wah.
Now, there's two things I want to say about what you're saying, and then you can add to this, and you could critique me. Number one, I think one of the problems is that we believe that we're just Muslim only, not Muslim and Black or Muslim and Latino. So we have separated ourselves thinking that just because I'm Muslim now, that the problems of people of color in this country don't affect me anymore. For some odd reason. That's the first thing. Second thing is that I think that I want to say this in a way that maybe you can expound on it. There's been some religious colonization of the indigenous people, meaning that you have like the foreigners have their own agenda for us, and brothers come back from foreign countries, they come back with a certain type of agenda or a certain type of way of thinking that not the basis of Aqidah for us, that's for all over the world. But there's a problem when you try to apply certain applications to us in a way that's only for there and it doesn't work in my ghetto. So maybe you can expound on what I'm trying to say if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know. I understand. I understand exactly. I think what you're saying, heart to heart. I think this has been, alhamdulillah, this is a conversation that's community wide and it extends beyond certain geographies now. One of the things, and Dawood Walid from Care, Michigan, brought this up yesterday in his talk that he did in Michigan with regard to Islam in America. Something that I didn't know. He brought up the fact, which was primarily people of African descent. It was people of African descent and others who tried to join into that struggle, like parts of the Jewish community. But it was mostly people of African descent and those who were their supporters, striving for human rights. We call it civil rights, but striving for human rights. A consequence of the Martin Luther King movement and the pressure that was being put on the system by Malcolm was that the immigration bill had changed in the early 60s. And it allowed for non-discrimination based on country of origin. So basically, blacks in this country opened up the path for other Muslims to come here, to come into the Muslim community, and then, kind of change the tone. If it wasn't for the black community in general, the Muslims, immigrant Muslims that we see would not have come into the country, because it was the civil rights struggle which opened up that door. The reality is that at a certain point in time, two trajectories change, and we can't and when we talk about the history of Islam, we have to talk about what came before, especially what was there, what other people were practicing. When you start looking at those groups that were more inclined to revolutionary struggle and the black cause and so on and so forth, because a lot of our imams came out of the revolutionary movements. That's just a reality. And they became Sunnis and they worked that out however they worked it out. Whether we agree or disagree is just part of the history and the reality. They had two different agendas. One agenda was, the other agenda was the immigrant community was aiming to make gains educationally and economically. And they weren't even sure that they were going to stay in this country. It was by default, after some time, that a lot of them began to settle more and more. And we're excluding from that people that had migrated here a while ago and they were settled in. Some of them disappeared. We're talking about the general thrust in the 60s of the students that were coming in and so on and so forth. So with time, the situation of each community became defined based on interests. And so one community decided to pursue white society and middle class society, and the toys and the benefits that come along with that. And so they, in essence, aim to be white and to integrate that society. Another part of the community was locked out. The other part of the community was locked out. Individuals made it, and part of, you have different success stories to that. With that, you have the Wharf Dean community. You have others who were not from that community that were moving into the middle class and establishing themselves. But what ended up being the case in all of that state of flux is that you had two different trajectories, and it caused an internal clash. It caused an internal clash in the Dawah. Many places, people began to rebel against the old imam, saying, "Man, you're not on the haq, you're not on the sunnah," because some of the students, when they were coming in, they were bringing in different types of knowledge, and people began to go. In the 80s, people went to go study overseas, and so our community became disoriented with trying to figure out what Islam is and what direction do we go in. Whereas the immigrant community became more settled in their role in America, where what they want to achieve. Although they haven't fully come into American society because they don't have the political power to really make decisions. They have some wealth, they have a little bit of a voice, but they don't have enough of a voice to be able to lock down Islamophobia or change foreign policy or do much for the Muslim world. The most that they do is they collect some dollars from here and they send it, and it's really a drop in the bucket. They're not really as effective as we think they are. You know what I'm saying? But in light of all that, our community became disoriented. And as our community, and even Dr. Sherman Jackson, he talked about this issue, basically the issue of authenticity, where the leadership in the indigenous community became challenged by our people itself and the immigrant community, and it became inauthentic. And so the immigrant community, they came in, They took the voice, they took the platform, they took the leadership, they changed the direction of the community from being one which is empowering the people to just a general da'wah and building masajid, and that was it. So we lost our sense of direction in the sense of trying to figure out what Islam is, because we were still in the process of growth. We had Islam on an institutional level as far as having our own communities and schools and so on and so forth. We got that piece
Mm-hmm.
right. But as far as details in Aqidah and fiqh and how to practice, we were still trying to figure that out. And so the communities went in two different directions in that regard. And again, what has happened is the end result of choosing uh, not to deal with the social problems that the indigenous Muslim have, is that the immigrant community, they rolled off of the backs of the black struggle and then just turned around and say, yo, you guys are on your own. We're not, we represent Islam. And so that's where we're at. And some people may challenge me on that,
No,
but I think that that is a good summary of of the situation, and what has happened.
no. Now that leads me to my next question. Then, good that you brought that up. My next question is, what are the differences between the two communities, the inner city community and when we say the suburban, more immigrant community, in the success or failures in Dawa? What are the differences between the two communities? What are the success in the inner city communities and the failures, and what are the failures or success in the immigrant communities, and what are the differences? Why did the differences of direction? Did it have to happen that way because of environment, basically, and their success and failures is basically based on what? If you understand the question.
Yeah, Islam, one of the successes of Islam is that it gave people an opportunity to have an alternative life. Regardless of what we see at face value, we can sit there and say, well, you didn't achieve this in your life. Man, people's souls, people had the opportunity to rip away from worshiping an image, or people had the opportunity to come into something that will orient their lives. So Islam in the inner city has always been associated with personal transformation, with people striving to change themselves, with people breaking, with people being associated with justice, and people associated with the upliftment of their community. And that's why Islam in the hood has always been identified with black dignity, black upliftment, and everybody who comes under that. And I think that where our failure is lack of continuity, and part of that is the economics. We fail to economically grow, and we fail to build a solidifying leadership, part because of internal fighting with each other. There was internal fighting. It could have been provoked from the outside of the community, but some of that stuff also comes from ourselves. So the thing is, when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about identifying failures, I wouldn't say them failures 100%. I would say that there's things that we have to learn on, we have to learn about, and see how we can build on those things where we have become ineffective. I don't want to completely say failures, because we're still in the growth process and we can still change that reality. Uh, and so we
No.
need to talk about community building. We need to talk about nation building. We need to talk about really dealing with our people's situations, and we need to pay more attention to the qualitative development of our children, our families, and those who are coming into Islam,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially from the side of their psychology, their background issues, their family issues, and from the side of understanding the deen in a way where they can be effective in life. As far as the immigrant community is concerned, their success has been to take Islam into the suburban realm, and lay a seed for Islam in an uncharted territory, in the sense that they have penetrated that part of society. Where they're ineffective is that they really are not contributing anything back to that society. You know what I'm saying? In the sense that they just have masajid
Mm.
and outposts for someone that may be interested in Islam to know Islam or come into Islam, but they haven't really reached the point where they're effective at helping people carry on to the next level. Because what's happening is that the people that are coming into Islam, they're in between the hood and the suburbs, and they're identifying more with the Muslims in the inner city than they are in the suburbs. And so some Muslims that are coming in are confused, as to where they belong. And we see this on a constant basis, because somebody can be from the suburbs and really not identify with those Muslims out there, because at the end of the day, those are cultural hubs. You know, you're talking about the Arabic speaking community and the Southeast Asian community for the most part, that they're residing in the suburbs, and those masajid have become cultural hubs. They haven't really become
Mm,
outposts in the real sense of, in the real sense of educating the people. They're just outposts for Islam in a symbolic sense. So, they're what where they would have to change is that they would have to see where they can be more involved in their communities. They're going to have a different strategy, right? They're dealing with different issues. They're dealing with the issues of being aliens to their neighbors. They need to be more involved in the school system. They need to be more involved in community governance, and so on and so forth. And some communities have moved beyond that, like
mm,
Michigan and places in Chicago and in the Virginia area and in Texas. They're already at that level. You know what I'm saying? Where they're involved. The thing, what the missing piece in those communities usually is the convert. Usually is the convert is having the most difficulty. But they're like Michigan now. They moved to the point where they're looking at state politics. Being involved in state politics. You have other places where they're heavily involved in local politics, and that becomes important because
mm,
all of us should be concerned with self-governance, governing our communities and protecting our interests. And there's nothing wrong with it. And Philadelphia, that's what we need. We need the ability to be able to engage the local authorities and talk about how, like, an area like Kensington, like, how can we address making these clean, safe zones for our children? You know what I'm saying? Why is it that this primarily one area in the city has been plagued with heroin, and to an extent where it has destroyed the population from being able to see signs of health? You know, you wake up and you see people on opiates and this and that, and you see people overdose, and that's not healthy for children. So the Muslims, if they're going to be in that environment, they're going to have to be, they're going to have to be proactive, or they're going to have to make hijrah from there. They're going to have to go to another place in the city where the Muslims are strong, but they can't stay in that environment and be overpowered by that, because they destroy themselves and the children are going to be destroyed. That those environments are too problematic, and that's going to take a whole different mindset. That's going to take a whole different mindset of how you
mm.
interact with that environment. That's in my opinion. That's in my opinion,
Nah.
of course.
Um, the next question is, why don't we mix our efforts? For example, um, you'll find that I give you an example of something that really happened. Like we don't the immigrants and the indigenous Muslims don't mix their efforts a lot. And I remember when it was a masjid in Philadelphia, a big immigrant masjid, and they have like a little waqf where they give away, or they have a place where a Beit al-Mal, whatever, where they give away money and food to struggling Muslims. But it really only for their people, because when a brother, he was African American, a Black American, he went there to get this help, and they threatened to call the police on him. And we find this, or we go in there and you see the Black African guy, he's cleaning the bathroom, or he's the security guard. You don't see any role for them outside of that. And the African Americans are obviously, we're sensitive to that type of stuff. So we're more aggressive as far as our standing up to the immigrants. We're kind of like, well, we don't need you anyway. You're not going to treat me any kind of way. So that whole, and then the immigrants basically not having any empathy for our plight, and or not understanding systematic racism is different than religious bigotry that they may be facing. So it's this it's kind of this uneasy alliance, and then it leads us not mixing our efforts at all. So, could you speak on that for the people to understand what is it? Some of the other things that's keeping our communities at each other's throat and not actually mixing.
Some years back, Imam Abdul Malik, he was in Brooklyn, the Masjid Taqwa. He did a tape. That's when we had tapes. And he posed a question. It was
Yeah.
the topic of the khutbah: are we a racist ummah? So, regardless of whether you agree with Imam Abdul Malik or not, in his orientation, he's now in Philadelphia, by the way. The the reality is that we have racism in ummah. Some of that was prejudice that was carried over from overseas, and some of it was prejudice carried over from overseas, and it blended with American racism. So we have prejudice and we have racism in the Muslim community towards people of color. And my contention is that because the Muslims have adopted a white supremacist attitude coming from overseas, thinking that everything white is right. You know what I'm saying? And so they haven't stepped to the occasion of the education of the Sunnah, which is teaching us that, that all of us come from one family. You know what I'm saying? All of us are children of Adam, despite our colors, and what distinguishes us is taqwa. That's the basic lesson, right, of the khutbat al-wada that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam left us with. So we're conscious of that. That was pretty much the last teaching that the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam left us with. So we have that issue in the community. The other issue is that we have classism, and we can't also rate all of these people that are Muslim in name and Muslim in appearance as Muslim 100% in practice. You know what I'm saying? There's a nifaq al-amali. There's a hypocrisy that comes in deeds, not necessarily nifaq, i'tiqad, meaning that they're out of the deen, but they're in their regard of the sunnah and how we deal with each other. They have taken on the way of the unbeliever. They have taken on the way of what Islam warns us against as far as dealing with each other, and we have to be real with that. And so some people, there's individuals which will support. There's individuals which support the situation of the Muslim community in the U.S., regardless of who they are. And then there's some who will not support. And we need to distinguish between the two so that we're precise. Where we have that laser. Those who won't support us, which is the vast majority. You know what I'm saying? And the reason why I say that is because look at the ruling of zakat. Look at the ruling of, now we're going to Eid al-Adha. Look at the relief organizations. They took a default position, a default position, and even Shaykh Uthaymeen and others have talked about the issue. Many of the Shaykh from within the Salafi Dawah, outside of the Salafi Dawah, what's the asl as far as zakat is concerned? Then if it's not from that locality, from the people in the close proximity, close locality, the default position is that it goes intiqal zakat or naql zakat, that the zakat is taken from one place to another. So when it comes to the zakat, even the issue of the udhiyah, people are focused on overseas. People are focused on overseas. They have made the whole empowerment position that it is empowering the Muslims overseas. Although in reality, they're not empowering the Muslims overseas. Because I used to work with organizations that did fundraising. The percentage of money that they collect in comparison to what Muslim countries give is a drop in the bucket. So even if 1 million to 2 million of what they collected were to stay in the US, it would empower the Muslim community. So there has to be a move in which we start calling and we start demanding for zakat to come back into our communities. There's a contention between the Southeast Asians, mostly the Deobandis and the Arab community. Can zakat be utilized, when we talk about the category of fi sabilillah, can it be utilized to build masajid, to further the cause of the da'wah and so on and so? In general, in the Arab community, they say yes. They follow the fatwa that says yes. In the Southeast Asian community, they're split, with some of them closing the door in that regard. So even in that regard, when it comes to building, like how the heck is it that in North Philadelphia you have an Ahmadiyya masjid which is built from the ground up, where it has acquired acres of land? You know what I'm saying? And we have not one masjid which is in the hood of that stature, which has the ability of community outreach. That's because the zakat is not being used properly. You know what I'm saying? The zakat is not being used in the way of empowering the people. If we're going to use the category of zakat that says that is for fi sabilillah. So the point that I'm getting at, I'm using these examples, and I tend to go on tangents to explain, but there's a point here that our fiqh has to be one of empowerment. Our fatwa have to be empowerment. That's one of the things. When you have a fatwa which says that you have to make hijrah, that immediately disempowers our community. When you have an idea that says we have no mashaykh in America, that immediately disempowers our community. When you have this mindset that you are not obligated to establish the deen in your family, or when you have a fatwa which kind of discourages education, or when you have a fatwa which, for instance, half of the community was born with a fatwa that is allowable to take mortgages out, and the other half is like, well, this is riba, is haram. In other words, we confuse ourselves in our fiqh in such a way that we don't empower ourselves. So not only our aqidah has to be an aqidah that also ties into our self-esteem, our human dignity. It's not just the issue of we believe in Tawheed Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, Asma'i wa Sifat, and we take positions like this, but we also have to understand the effects and the impact of aqidah on our psychology, on our health, on our well-being, and our fiqh also has to be like that. And this is what is kind of has disempowered the community, that we have institutions which collect resources from the community, and people in charge of those resources that are deciding we're not going to invest in the community. We're not going to use this to invest in the poor community. And the poor community can consist of poor Bangladesh, Yemenis, African, Philadelphia. You know what I'm saying? We need that money. We need that money to come back. And in order to be able to make those type of moves, we have to have councils. We have to have leadership that comes together and is questioning this stuff. And we have to be in a position where we're discussing, okay, fine, we're going to help the Muslims overseas, but we need a percentage to come back. We have to take Islamic Relief to task. We have to take ICNA Relief to task. We have to take all of these major relief organizations which are collecting money to task and say, we need you to spend a certain percentage of that, on the Muslim community. And we have to have a plan for Philadelphia in specific about what direction we're going to move in that sense, and every other community, right? And so I think, I went beyond the limit, but that's kind of the orientation that I wanted to say, that our
Yeah.
aqidah and our fiqh has to empower us, as well as our discussion on tazkiyat an-nafs. It has to be universal. The Salafis and the Sufis need to come to a point at which we're teaching is universal. You know what I'm saying? Is a universal tazkiyat an-nafs, because we have confused the people where this is bid'ah, or or weak, or practices which are based on a hadith which are problematic, or practices which are based on dreams, or what the Shaykh was inspired. That's not a sound basis for tazkiyat an-nafs. And so if that can be an agreed upon platform, then we would have covered Islam in the areas of aqidah, in the areas of action, in the areas of tazkiyat an-nafs, or in the issue of Islam, iman and ihsan. And then that covers the framework for the deen. And then the other side is just looking at empowerment, addressing our social issues. But if we're confused in the deen, it's going to be difficult to move forward. And that's what has been done. We have become confused in the deen, in part because of our own internal discussions and debates, and in part because of what was brought over here as baggage from overseas.
Mm-hmm. Now, you bring me to my next question. Then, alhamdulillah, man, you bringing me into my questions.
MashaAllah.
Like you just said, basically, what you just said is I've always thought that we have been basically what I call religiously colonized, meaning that we're kind of been pushing a direction of outward look and slogans and the whole, I'm Salafi, cliquish mentality that has nothing to do with the way of the Salaf. That kind of dominated our religious reality and our religious culture, and it wasn't any a fixing of the heart, and it wasn't any direction of changing the way we thought. And I thought that I think like what Sheikh White is doing right now, he's doing the Tree of Iman, and the way that he's doing it, and I'm listening to the class. We needed that from the very beginning. That whole issue of just dealing with, okay, this is Iman, and actions are with Iman, and this is how you implement an action that's from Iman. That whole reality, we never really had that as a culture, so we missed out there. The thing that you brought me into, as far as the zakat, the way it's being used, as far as everything else, and one of the people on here, they asked a question about, he mentioned something about the immigrants, our immigrant brothers being guests of the government, and us being property of the government. One of the things that's so deep that I'm noticing is that if the immigrants ever got too powerful here and ever got to the point where, because they could be sent back to a landmass. Us for the indigenous Muslims, the Hispanics and the blacks who are Muslim in America, this is our land. So it seems like it's more of an effort to keep us ever from having any type of political, financial, spiritual, cultural power, because that's more dangerous for powers to be than for immigrants you can just kick out anytime you want. Maybe you can expand on what I'm saying. And also, because the government helps the immigrants, because they're able to build big masjids, because they're able to get the zakat in their hands, does that make them, who helped them become the Muslim elite? And they can speak for Islam for us in America when we are the indigenous Muslims here. But it seems that the foreigners have become the Muslim elite and we have become the Muslim poor. Maybe you can expand on what the things I've just said.
Firstly, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. In this case, we have to take some responsibility. And that at this point, we have to organize.
Mm-hmm.
My contention is that just like the Indian mashaykh, some of them, they always say that the da'wah won't move without the Arabs. This is one of the things, especially those mashaykh who are tied to that group, Jamaat al-Tabligh. My contention with that, the da'wah is not going to move until the African American community moves. You can have the Latino community come in and is trying to organize itself, but it's still a fairly young community. And but the African American community, that's how the da'wah was moving before. The da'wah was moving because of the struggles of the African American community. So the African American community there has to be a leadership and a new leadership which is emerging within the African American community. My contention is in particular in Philadelphia, because I have the mindset that if it changes in Philly, it will impact other places because of the large number of people. But not only in Philly, in other places like ATL, you know what I'm saying? Wherever there's a large mass of African Americans, Detroit, but it's specific in Philly because Philly has a special quality to it. It has a long history of Islam. You know, it has a long history of transformation, and it has the potential. And we're from Philly, so there's a little bit of an asabiya there. That there has to be an internal, there has to be a coming together, right? Of creating a voice and having a platform in which there's a unified voice. That platform is being used correctly, you know, to begin to address Islamic issues. The issue of the Muslim elite has a lot to do with wealth. It has a lot to do with people play the wealth card. And when you play the wealth card, you have to play in certain circles and you play by certain rules. And so those people who have gone into that, again, they're trying to appease white society. And part of the appeasement of white society has a lot to do with the post 9/11 realities that the immigrant community wants to see itself as part of the society. Before, they never had that contention. They never associated with American society. 9/11 smacked them up. And so now the discourse changed to we're part of American society, which is good that they came to a realization that they're not going overseas. But the problem now is that they have taken a platform and they're only speaking for a segment of the community. Some of that is natural, that happens, you know, that you tend to be biased towards wherever you're at. But some of it is intentional. Some of it is intentional, and it works into the scheme of taking Islam away from having indigenous roots. That's why the history of Islam is important. You know what I'm saying? That's why the history of Islam doesn't begin with the nation of Islam. But history of Islam begins with the struggle that took place in West Africa with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. If you look at the history of West Africa, you begin to see that the ulama engaged in an internal struggle with the non-Muslims of West Africa and the colonists, and that caused a number of ulama to be enslaved and taken and spread out throughout the Americas. So when we go through all the Americas, all the way up to North America, when we go to Brazil, the Caribbean, or even to North America, we see roots of basically of Muslims that were enslaved. And we're not even talking about just like a roots type of concept. Like we're talking about a reality that has not really been uncovered or unearthed. So when you look at that reality, the Muslim world was already contending with European powers. And you had the Moroccans and some of the Arabs that had sided that with the Europeans. It's not 100% like the Afrocentrists say, but that was there. So race discussions begin in West African scholarship. The issue of Muslims enslaving other Muslims begin in West African scholarship. And the issue of social justice begins, you know, within West African scholarship, where they're talking about a fiqh of empowerment. They're talking about the just leader. They're talking about dignity. They're talking about the rights of the Muslim. They're talking about the issue of purifying the Muslim community of beliefs which are degrading and taken away from Islam. And that's something that a lot of us have not come in contact with. So all of that discourse comes, we're just reviving pieces of it. And so now that brings us to that point of where do we want to be in our history now that we're looking back and we're seeing everything that came. And now we're at a point where new generation is basically getting old. Another generation is getting older. Another generation is coming up. That Muslim elite that's there will continue to be there as long as we don't organize ourselves, and as long as we don't take a role in our community, and as long as we don't take the concept of nation building. We can't expect for the Muslim community, as represented by the immigrant community, to speak to our interests, because they will not. They don't have the look. Imam Siraj Wahaj had asked ICNA for a unified leadership. There's a video on YouTube that there should be one Amir in the whole of the U.S. that they opted for not doing that. There was, even in the city that I'm in, the Islamic Center began at the inner city. They opted to make the Islamic Center and move it outside of the city into a far-off racist suburb. And so there's moves that are made in the immigrant community that have to do with personal interests, and every community will do that. The problem is that how we identified our interest as a community, right? These type of programs like this, streamlining, our ability to talk to each other, streamlining our ability to communicate, streamlining our networking, creating a voice for ourselves, going back to the old heads who they know how to do press releases. We should be on the front line of certain press releases that are there. You know what I'm saying? We should have people that are trained in media, and that's going to take us learning how to network with each other, because we may not be networking with people we may not agree with. So the Muslim elite was created out of personal interest and out of political interest. People, are
Mm.
in the community, and they are also, shaping the community in a certain way, because there's certain political realities. And I'll tone down with saying this: the Rand Corporation created a study, and that study before it was created about a decade ago, about how to pit the Sufi and the Salafi community together. How to pit the two communities against each other, and how to boost up liberal voices. And so now you have the women leading the Salat al-Jum'ah. Now you have, the feminist movement. So those voices are boosted up, like Hirsa Ali and others. They're boosted up, and other
Mm.
voices are put down.
Nah, nah, nah. So, basically, my other question is this: um, the realities on the ground for us. Which should be the first place that we start? And unfortunately, when we say stuff like our people, when we say stuff like start at home, we say stuff like people automatically go into the nationalistic realities. Even though in the Quran we hear many ayahs which say, "Oh my people, oh my people," and we have many proofs in Islam saying that it's permissible to deal with the realities on the ground as far as the people that's in front of you, and we like to shy away from it. When I'm one of the people that's not, I don't like to shy away from the fact that the people of color in this country, whether they are Puerto Rican, whether they are black, whether they are whatever color, whatever they may be from, and they're in America, they're people of color, to deal with their particular issues. Like you said, on the East Coast, Hispanic and blacks, our realities, because we live together in the same neighborhoods, our realities are kind of intertwined and intertwangled. Maybe in the California it's not the same, but in Philly, Jersey, New York, and Baltimore, places like that, Puerto Ricans and blacks basically get the same treatment from the system. So the realities on the ground, where do we start? Obviously, we know Akida, Iman. We know that part of it, but the physical realization of all of that. What's the first place that we should start to have some type of uh, real life effect on the environment around us? If you understand what I'm trying to say. I know I go in tandems, but I'm basically trying to get what's the starting point, because a lot of people will say, well, we hear you, but what's the plan? So what do you think the plan should be, and who should be part of this plan? If you understand what I'm trying, the direction I'm going.
I think can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Mufti Munir recently, he talked about what comes first, is Aqidah first, that type of concept. And to be honest with you, I think he has a definitive word on what he said there. We should rally behind what he said. He gave a very mature vision of how we should look at the issue. It was balanced overall. And he talked about, there's different things which need to be addressed. But I think that a lot of the brothers that are doing work in Dawah need to come to terms with each other. We have to have a vision that we're agreeing to, at least in a general sense. Because without that, it becomes hard to solidify the community. The community keeps hearing too many different messages. So we have to have a general, a general point of agreement, on what are some of the things that we're working on. And I think that we already are talking about, we need to work on our community. We need to be working on issues, and that will come back to the issue of the family and the issue of economics and so on and so forth. We really are not going to be able to move forward until we address, the leadership issue in some way. But at a practical level, we need to make the masjid our base. Our masajid have to be a base for us, and our masajid have, what are our needs, because like situations in Southwest Philly may not be the situation, in North Philadelphia. So each masjid has to look at what their priorities are. But in a general sense, we have to have an idea of community building. We should all be in the mindset of nation building. And once we're in the mindset of nation building, the masjid has to be our focus, and that masjid has to have an educational component, which means that we have to really be focused on understanding Islam, and it has to have a social service component, which means that we have to be servicing the people of Islam and those outside of the people of Islam. So though if we can have a vision, if we can at least create more forms like this where we interacting with each other, and if we can make the masjid our base and start working on transforming that masjid into actual educational social service, educational social service center, then I think we will be going in a better direction, right? But also we have to, look at economic empowerment. You know what I'm saying? Solidifying the family, economic empowerment. So again, it's kind of hard to say 100%. Where do we begin? Because I can say where we begin, but if we don't have a mutual plan, you know, on where to begin together, it just becomes my word as to what I think should be the case. But that's why these things need a collective effort. You know what I'm saying? They need a collective effort. They
Mm.
need to say that, we can agree in a general sense that we're working on this. And if we do that, we can be in Philly working, we could be in Detroit working, we could be in New York working, we could be down south working, and the results will be seen because we're all working for the same thing. And as long as we're working for the same thing, you'll see the results little by little. So it has to be empowering the individual, empowering the family, empowering that masjid community. You know what I'm saying? And then we can start to go, we're in a position where we can go outward more. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to focus on the issue of Islamic education, social services, economics, right? And then some people from us that are specialized should deal with the political reality, deal with the local councilman. The masjid needs a lot. We need to take that lot. You know what I'm saying? Uh, our 501c3 is not on point. We get our 501c3 on point. We need to learn that. We need to institutionalize, and that's one of the successes of the immigrant community is that they learn early on, that you need to have legal institutions. So our masajid need to be also attached to legal institutions. Not 100%. Everything has to go through a 501c3 because we can do things independent. But there should be one aspect in which we do have these institutions that are necessary to interface with the community, with the society. And our community needs to be in the mode that we need to give to our community. We need to figure out how to fundraise. We need to figure out how to build funds. We need to be, especially in Philadelphia, Muslims need to be at the forefront of gentrification, especially the Muslim communities that are operating out of masajid, because that gives you power. The more you have land, you have property, you can flip it, you can rent it, you also have say. If you own half a block, you have say. And so there's no harm in going into those areas that haven't been developed, and we come in and we develop with this type of plan. So vision, having a vision of nation building, coming back to the masjid, turning that masjid into an educational and a social service component, dealing with each other in the side of, brother, there's a job with the city. Oh, brother, this person needs a job. Being in that mode of empowering each other. Oh, brother, this brother has a psychological, mental health issue, family problem. Let's get the services in there. You know what I'm saying? This brother has a drug issue. Don't just cast them out. Get your social workers and create an action plan from a Muslim side of things, and then you have the social workers from the system side of things, and then we have tabs. Okay, so and so he relapsed X amount of times. Okay, let's see where he's at, what he needs. You know what I'm saying? This is people up. Okay, this sister, she's only making 30 a year or 25 a year. This brother is making 20 a year. They come together, they make 40, 50 a year. Or that's where we have to get into the mindset of matching people, nation building, solving issues, from that angle.
Nah. There is a brother named his name is Hanif Davis. The brother's name Hanif Davis, and he's putting together this program where it's just dealing with a lot of the social ills of the American indigenous Muslim, and he's getting people together to go online. You don't have to leave your city, where you be online, and all the different Muslim leaders or imams or people in social programs and people doing this or that, different professional Muslims, they come on there and they're having basically a panel of discussion from wherever they are. They're online together, and the community can take them to task. I mean, the community can voice their concerns and say, hey, these are things that we need. And really, the panel is responding to each other and to the community. And his brother named Hanif Davis. So anybody who has any of those type of skills would like to be a part of that, inbox me your phone number. Inbox me your phone number. Inbox me whatever information you have. I can pass it on to the brother. And then also that invites you, brother Yusuf Rios, too. That because the plan that the brother has is a real nice plan, and he wants to bring everybody like yourself and Tahir Wide and all those different brothers, and bring them on a panel together online. And alhamdulillah, he got a lot of brothers who agree to it. And then the community can take people to task. And I think it's time to take ourselves to task, like basically what you're saying. And our leadership has to be taken to task, no doubt about that. So that's the brother's name, and that's the program that he has.
There's a point, maybe is for another session, but one thing that's very serious in our community is the issue of the family. When we talk about male-female dynamics, it becomes World War III, like between brothers and sisters. And so it's like we have not been able to crack that code. Huh? Yeah, 3 and 4. You know what I'm saying? The end of the world.
Yeah.
And we have not been able to crack that code, and there's so much anger, so much hurt, so much mistrust that in reality, and this is from brother, this is a brother to brother side, because we're brothers talking, and it's not to put down the sisters, but if our households are not straight and our women are not on board with the building program, it becomes difficult. And from a sister side, if the brothers are not straight, it becomes difficult to be able to move forward. So in reality, we're in crisis mode in that. And, if everyone would get together and start really addressing the marriage issue not necessarily from the angle of people just getting married, matching them up, but the healing process, the healing process and how to really construct the marriage, we have to be real on what we're dealing with. And because we keep buying into middle class society, the conditions that what people are expecting is not realistic. If brothers that are not in a good shape, and the sisters are expecting that the brother, be at six-figure status like overnight, that's just not realistic. So, that's one of the things that in our dawah, we have to have a lot of focus on that.
Nah, no doubt. And you know what? I definitely like to bring you on for another talk dealing with that, because I think that like I said before, if the marriage situation isn't fixed in our community, then it's kind of like putting fresh cement down, but then then trying to build on wet cement. It's kind of like this, you can't build on what seed is going to keep falling down. It's never going to be firm. And I think that's probably one of the main problems is that we get divorced just as much as the disbelievers, or even more so. And so one sister may be married to 10 brothers line up in the row to pray. She probably been married to all of them. So when you have that type of dynamic in the community, it's almost impossible to build a community when nobody's staying married. That's a big
there's no
problem.
doubt. And it's hard to nation build when you don't have a stable unit. And part of the the Quranic the Quranic revelation, the graduality of that was that eventually, that was the aim, to reconstruct the family. So when they get to Medina, it's all about reconstructing the family. You know what I'm saying? And that's something that we have to focus on. We shouldn't even take that as a negative at this point, because we're still in the process of learning. We should take that as, okay, this is the phase that we're in. Now we have to deal with it. Because if we take it too much as a negative, we're going to end up internalizing some self-hate and looking at ourselves as we have a problem. Why? I think the issue is we're trying to figure things out, and we're doing it on our own. And that's just the reality. And we're doing it with a minimal amount of support. You know what I'm saying? And actually, the crazy thing about so many divorces is that in the Muslim world, now that's beginning to occur. But the whole issue of remaking yourself, they're lost at that. How do you remake yourself? Whereas in the American community, people are like, you do this, you remake yourself, you get back into the groove, you start, so there's that positive aspect of it too. But that's the issue of stability. That's how wealth is going to be built. That's how children are going to be raised properly. That's the area that we're missing in the stability point.
Barakallahu feek. So, like I said, that's all the questions. Can we make we can make another date for? I would like to hear your talk on this marriage situation. I think definitely we need to go there because, like somebody here said, the brother Abdul Hakim, he said, as a husband and a father, I feel that us as fathers and amirs of our family, a lot of us have priorities mixed up. We want to help the wider community when our kitchen is burning. So I think what he's trying to say that a lot of us play Superman, and we're so much involved in trying to save everybody, like we're the Justice League, but in our homes are basically total disasters areas. And I've seen this with a lot of imams. I've seen this with a lot of different, for some of our elders and imams in our community, that their children are at risk, but they themselves, and I'm talking about the children they have with them, not some fall. I'm talking about the children they have in their homes are at total risk of being in the streets and astray, and they're worrying about being the wali over sisters at the masjid. That just doesn't make sense.
That's because the community breakdown. You need community. The imams need people to support them as well. Community, when it's not there 100%.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be like a village. That's the bottom line. And sometimes people reach out to the community because
Yeah.
internally they need that support. You know what I'm saying? I don't find that there's anything wrong with that 100%, that people are reaching out to the community. I just find that we just need to admit we need help. We need to help each other. Everybody's vulnerable. Everybody's vulnerable on this shit right now. And so it's like you're not going to expect perfection from one group. That's not going to be the case. We need to be supporting each other. And that's how we build strength. So if the imam is out there in the front line, brothers should be like, Imam, I got your back. Let me take your son out. Let me take, can we, your daughters, we have these programs running. But what happens is a lot of times is that everything comes on that fulcrum point, and that pressure is there. And you see the need, because you can't have a stable family ultimately if you don't have a community for them to interact in. That's only going to be a matter of time before they get jammed up. You have to have a community for them to interact with. Who are your children going to get married to? You know what I'm saying? But there are priorities. You're right that there are priorities. You're right about that 100%. And we remind each other.
So, exactly. So, inshallah ta'ala, barakallahu fiqh, Sheikh Yusuf Rios. Like I said, I want to, when I get off, when we get off, let's try to make another date for dealing with the issue of marriage and what that means to a community. Inshallah, we can probably get that going for another date.
Okay, inshallah.
Maybe next weekend if we have the time.
Okay, inshallah. Let's keep it moving.
So after, like I said, I'll text you the time and the same bat station, inshallah.
Barakallahu fikum. Barakallahu fikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.